Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy intense first-person stories about betrayal, family battles, and hard-won survival, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because what happened to me began like an ordinary autumn evening and ended with my entire life being torn up by the roots. My name is Adrian Mercer. I'm 35 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been built with dirt under my nails and weather on my skin. I'm a landscape designer by trade, though I've always thought of myself more simply than that. A man who helps living things grow. I started a small company called Wild Earth Studio in the lake country of Belmere, a quiet region of steep hills, old forests, and cold blue water where the mornings smell like rain and cedar. My work taught me patience long before life ever demanded it from me. You learn quickly, in my line of work, that nothing living can be rushed. Seeds open when they are ready. Trees don't become strong in one season. Even the most beautiful garden begins in darkness, buried and uncertain. I believed I understood hardship because I understood nature. I was wrong. Nothing I had learned from the earth prepared me for the day my marriage collapsed in front of me. It was late October, a Tuesday, and the sky had that heavy gray look that means rain is only minutes away. I came home earlier than expected after finishing a planting job on a long stone path lined with young silver birches. My boots were caked with mud, my back was sore, and I remember thinking how good it would feel to step inside, wash up, and hear the usual sounds of home. But when I opened the front door, the house was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, hollow quiet. The kind that makes your stomach tighten before your mind understands why. I set my bag down and listened. No music, no clatter from the kitchen, no laughter from upstairs. Only the faint sound of fabric brushing against fabric. I followed it to our bedroom and stopped in the doorway. My wife, Elise, was standing beside the bed with a suitcase open. She was folding a pale silk scarf with such calm precision that for a second my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. That scarf hit me harder than the suitcase. We had bought it together on a trip years ago, back when I still believed we were building a life that would last. She never looked up when she spoke. She just said, in the same tone someone might use to comment on the weather, "I'm leaving you for our son's music teacher." It felt as if something inside my chest snapped loose and dropped straight through me. Our little boy, Noah, only 6 years old, was sitting in the hall outside the bedroom with a box of crayons, drawing uneven spirals on a sheet of paper. He kept glancing up at us with wide hazel eyes, sensing the shape of disaster without understanding the words. I remember whispering, "What did you just say?" and hearing my own voice break, not from anger, but from disbelief so deep it almost felt like vertigo. Elise finally lifted her eyes to me, and what chilled me wasn't guilt. It was distance. There was no storm in her face, no struggle, no hesitation. Only a cold, unreachable calm. She told me his name was Damien Vale, Noah's piano instructor at the Arts Academy, and that the affair had been going on for months, while I had been outside in the cold, planting hedges, drawing patios, carrying stones, and coming home tired but full-hearted. She had been building another life behind my back with the man teaching scales to our son. Then Noah looked up and asked the question that split me open more than anything else that day. "Why is Mommy putting her clothes in a bag?" Elise crouched down beside him, smoothing his hair with the same careful grace she had used on the scarf, and told him she was moving into a new apartment with Damien. She even reminded him that he knew Damien already, that he played piano beautifully, that he would teach him so many things. I watched our son's face tighten in confusion, his little hand closing around that crayon so hard his knuckles turned white. I dropped to my knees and pulled him into my arms. He smelled like cookies and soap and the lavender detergent we always used on his pajamas. I shut my eyes and swallowed the wave rising in me because he did not need to watch his father fall apart. He needed something solid. He needed me to stay standing. I asked Elise, as calmly as I could, how she thought she could simply decide to take him and leave. I reminded her that he was my son too, that this was our home, that families were not pieces on a board she could rearrange on a whim. She clicked the suitcase shut and said her attorney had already explained everything. According to her, Custody usually favored the parent who could offer the more refined environment, the more prestigious life, the more stimulating future. She said my job was honorable, yes, but too physical, too unpredictable, too ordinary. Damien, on the other hand, was a respected artist with status, connections, and a cultured world I could never compete with. The cruelty of it wasn't even loud. It was polished, so natural to her that I honestly don't think she realized how vicious she sounded. We had been married 6 years, and all that time she had looked at my work and seen only dirt, never devotion, never beauty, never the quiet dignity of building something real with your hands. Through the window, I saw a sleek gray luxury sedan pull up outside our gate. A tall man stepped out wearing a dark coat and the easy self-possession of someone who had never had to bleed for anything he wanted. Elise reached for the suitcase and told Noah to say goodbye to his father because they were going to be late. Noah clung to my neck, shaking. I kissed his cheek and told him I was there, that I would always be there, that I wasn't going anywhere. Elise gently pried him away from me, and that gentle touch felt more brutal than a slap. If I had given in to the rage surging through me, I would have shouted. I would have broken things. But rage is fast and stupid, and children remember the sound of it forever. So I stood still while she walked out. I told her that if she left like this, she would destroy every last shred of trust between us. She gave me a sad little smile and said our marriage had been dead for a long time, like a winter garden with no light left in it. Then she stepped outside, and I watched from the window as Damien took her bag, touched her face, and opened the back door for my son. Noah pressed his hand to the glass and mouthed the word "Daddy" as the car rolled away down the drive. When they were gone, the house became unrecognizable. The silence turned violent. Her tea mug was still on the kitchen counter. Sheet music was scattered across the piano I had bought for her on our 3rd anniversary. I walked out into the yard, sat down on a stone bench, and for the first time in years, I cried without trying to stop myself. I cried for the family I thought I had, for the child carried away from his home, for the version of myself that had believed love and loyalty were the same thing. But the ground teaches you something important. Endings are not empty. They are brutal, yes, but they are also the beginning of whatever comes next. I could not stay frozen in that moment. I needed to understand what I was really dealing with. The next evening I went to a small bookstore cafe called Lantern and Pine, owned by my oldest friend, Owen Hart. Owen had the kind of face that made people confess things. He listened without interrupting while I told him everything. The suitcase, the cold words, the piano teacher, the expensive car, the way Elise had already rehearsed the legal script before I even walked through the door. When I finished, he handed me a mug of tea and said something that stayed with me. People like that don't fall in love with a person. They fall in love with a reflection. And men who chase married women through their students' families usually don't do it once. That sentence planted a seed in my mind. Over the next few days, I hired a private investigator named Martin Shaw, a discreet man with the soft voice of a librarian and the instincts of someone who knew how families hide their rot. While Martin began digging into Damien, I got a hard lesson in how quickly people reveal who they are when prestige enters the room. My brother-in-law called and told me I should stay calm, stay respectful, stop making things difficult. He repeated Elisa's complaints as if they were facts, that I had smothered her, that I was too rooted, too practical, too limited to understand her dreams. He actually told me she needed beauty in her life. I asked him if months of deception and running off with our child's teacher counted as beauty now. He went quiet, then repeated that she was happier with Damien and that Noah would adapt. It was better for everyone if I didn't make waves. That was the moment I realized he had chosen sides long before he called. Social shine had beaten truth. But the deeper shock came from my elderly neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Wren, who spent most mornings tending hydrangeas at the edge of her property. One morning she came over while I was pruning in a daze and said, with visible discomfort, that perhaps she should have spoken sooner. When I asked what she meant, she told me she had seen Elise with other men before Damien. Not once, more than once. Small signs over the past 2 years. Conversations that lasted too long by parked cars. Dinners that were never just work. A gallery owner, A man she met through a charity board. Another who used to drop her off 2 streets away. I felt the ground shift under me. Damien wasn't a shocking exception. He was simply the latest chapter in a pattern I had been too trusting to see. That night I stood in the bathroom staring at myself in the mirror and forced myself to say out loud that I was not going to live as a victim. Betrayed, yes. Humiliated, yes. But still a father, and that mattered more than my pain. When Martin finally returned with his report, it was worse than I expected. Damien Vale had spent over a decade moving through private academies and conservatories in different cities, leaving behind a trail of broken marriages, whispered complaints, and women he had charmed out of their lives. The pattern was always the same. Lonely or restless mothers, flattered by attention, drawn into the fantasy of refinement and rescue. In 2 previous institutions, there had been quiet complaints about his conduct that never turned into public scandal because everyone wanted to protect the school's image. Martin also found something else. Elise, even after moving in with Damien, was still seeing an art dealer on the side. I didn't feel jealousy when I heard that. I felt a kind of hollow sorrow, and beneath it, fear for my son. This wasn't romance. It was instability dressed up in expensive clothes. I took the file to a family lawyer named Rebecca Sloan, a woman known for being both sharp and deeply humane. I told her I didn't want revenge. I wanted custody. I wanted my son raised in truth, not inside some performance built on affairs and ego. Rebecca went through the report carefully and told me the evidence against Damien mattered, but the case would still be hard. Courts were wary of moral theater. I would need to show a pattern of instability that directly affected Noah's well-being. She also warned me that Elise and Damien would try to make me look unsophisticated, emotional, and unfit. To fund the legal fight, I sold a piece of land I had kept since the early days of my business, a small old nursery full of heirloom roses that meant a great deal to me. It hurt, but gardens can be replanted. A child only gets one childhood. Then, by sheer miserable luck, the opening came. One Saturday night, close to 1 in the morning, Martin called me. Damien had been arrested for driving drunk after leaving a charity gala. He had slammed his car into a stone barrier downtown. And he had not been alone. He was with a young cellist from the academy. Noah had been left at Damien's apartment with Elise. Rebecca filed an emergency motion first thing Monday morning, arguing that my son was living in an unstable and potentially dangerous environment. The emergency hearing was tense, but the judge listened carefully. Elise tried to minimize Damien's arrest as an isolated mistake. Her attorney painted me as a resentful tradesman, jealous of a more cultured man. Rebecca did not take the bait. She simply laid out the facts. The history Martin uncovered, the prior complaints, the affair pattern, the drunk driving arrest, the unstable household, and my steady involvement in Noah's day-to-day life. The judge granted me temporary primary custody pending further evaluation, with supervised visitation for Elise. That evening, Noah came home. He ran through the gate and threw himself at me so hard I nearly lost my balance. I picked him up and held him like I was trying to anchor both of us to the earth. He asked if we could plant seeds again. I told him we could plant as many as he wanted. For a while, life began to mend. I rearranged my work schedule, took fewer jobs far from town, and made sure I was there after school. On weekends, Noah and I walked the woods, built small raised beds, and planted herbs, bulbs, and wildflowers. I taught him the names of trees and explained how roots communicate underground, how the strongest support in nature is often invisible. I wanted him to know that quiet strength was still strength. But peace did not last. Damien, suspended from the academy after the scandal, was furious. Elise and Damien appealed the temporary order and started building a case against me. Suddenly there were witnesses willing to say I was manipulative, that I poisoned Noah against his mother, that I was unstable beneath the surface. The pressure built for weeks until one afternoon, outside a grocery store, Damien walked up to me while Noah was a few yards away watching a dog tied near the entrance. Damien leaned close and told me I had only won a round, not the war. He called me a gardener like it was an insult. He said Noah belonged in a different world now, and sooner or later they would erase me from the picture. Something cracked in me that day. I had held myself together for so long that I began to mistake suppression for strength. That night, after Noah was asleep and a sitter was with him, I made the worst decision of my life. I drove my work truck to Damien's apartment building. His car was parked outside, glossy and perfect under the streetlights. In the back of my truck was a load of rich black compost for a job the next morning. I backed up beside his car, opened the truck bed, and with a shovel started dumping heavy wet compost across the hood, the windshield, the vents, the polished surface he valued so much. I remember muttering something about giving his fake world a taste of real soil. For about 2 minutes, the act felt satisfying. Then the anger drained out and left only cold shame. I looked at my hands meant to build, to plant, to restore, and realized I had just handed my enemies exactly what they needed. The next morning, the police came to my door. A nearby security camera had recorded everything. I confessed immediately. I paid the fine, covered the cleaning costs, and accepted responsibility for property damage. When I called Rebecca, the disappointment in her silence was worse than any lecture. She told me we had been in a strong position, and now I had made myself vulnerable. The weeks that followed were awful. I barely slept. I punished myself by working until my body shook. Some nights Owen came over and pulled weeds with me under headlamps in the dark, just to keep me from sinking completely into my own mind. He told me that one broken branch does not erase a tree's roots. He told me that in court, I should not defend myself by pretending I had done nothing wrong. I should tell the truth and trust it to stand on its own. On the day of the final hearing, the sky above Belmere was bright and painfully clear. Elise arrived beside Damien, presenting the image they had always wanted the world to admire. Refined, composed, united. Her lawyer was ruthless. He displayed photos of Damien's car covered in soil and used them to paint me as a violent, primitive man ruled by resentment. He said a child should not be placed with someone capable of such impulsive vandalism. Elise cried when she testified. Real tears, I think. Fear can make tears real even when the story around them is false. She described our marriage as a cage of silence and routine, and Damien as the man who had awakened her to life. She said I had become frightening since the separation. When my turn came, Rebecca was ready to speak for me, but I asked the judge to let me speak myself. I stood up and admitted, without excuse, that what I had done to Damien's car was shameful, childish, and beneath the standards I wanted for my own life and for my son's example. I said I had acted from exhaustion, fear, and grief, not pride, and that I had accepted the legal and financial consequences because accountability matters. Then I told the court that a single ugly act should not be mistaken for the total truth of a human being. I said that every morning I woke before dawn to make Noah breakfast, pack his bag, and get him to school. I said I listened when he cried for his mother and never once used those moments to poison him against her, because protecting a child's heart matters more than winning an argument. I said I had fallen, yes, but I had gotten back up, and my only goal was to give my son stable ground to grow on. The courtroom went very still. What happened next changed everything. At the request of Elisa's side, apparently hoping to prove Noah had been harmed by me, the judge agreed to speak with him informally in chambers with a child psychologist present. The wait in the hallway felt endless. Elise paced. Damien scrolled his phone with fake calm. I sat with my hands clasped so tightly they hurt. When we were called back in, the judge's face had softened, but only slightly. She said children often see with a clarity adults try to bury under polished language. She told the court that when asked whether he was afraid of me, Noah had said, "My dad is like a big tree. Sometimes he gets sad when it rains, but he always keeps the wind off me." Then she turned to Elise and said Noah had expressed anxiety about staying in her household. He had heard arguments. He felt the instability. He did not feel secure there. The judge did not excuse my vandalism. She called it unacceptable and ordered me to complete a conflict management and co-parenting course. But she awarded me primary custody, granted Elise standard visitation, and imposed strict conditions limiting Damien's involvement in Noah's day-to-day life. The decision landed with the force of a storm finally breaking. I had not won because I was perfect. I had won because, in the end, truth had more weight than performance. Outside the courthouse, in the bright noon light spilling through the glass, Elise approached me alone. Damien had already drifted away, phone in hand, distracted by whatever came next. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, stripped of the confidence she wore the day she packed that suitcase. She told me I had won. I looked at her and, for the first time, I no longer saw a villain from a nightmare. I saw a woman chasing validation so desperately that she had burned down her own home to feel admired in the flames. I told her there were no winners here, not really. Noah had lost the illusion of an intact family. Both of us had lost the life we thought we were building. But she was still his mother, and I would never use him as punishment. I told her to get herself together, to become the mother he deserved, because that was all that mattered now. She nodded, cried silently, and walked away. Spring returned to Belmere slowly but beautifully. The yard began to wake up again. Sometimes I still missed the rose nursery I had sold, but when I watched Noah kneeling in the soil with a small trowel in his hand, dirt on his cheeks and joy all over his face, I knew I had made the right trade. One evening, beneath an orange-pink sky over the lake, he called me over to show me a bulb we had planted in winter, finally pushing up through the soil. I knelt beside him and wrapped an arm around his shoulders. The little green shoot looked fragile, but it had survived cold, darkness, and time. I told him that some things need to live through winter before they become strong enough to reach for the light. He leaned his head against me, and I understood then that healing is not clean, and dignity is not perfection. I had learned I was capable of anger, of mistakes, of weakness. But I had also learned that falling does not define you. What defines you is whether you tell the truth about your fall, take responsibility for it, and rise with both hands open. The old oak above us stirred in the evening breeze. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the fading sun rest on my face. My heart, which had once felt like wreckage, had become something living again. Not untouched, not innocent, but alive, rooted, and finally ready to grow. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Because sometimes life tears everything apart just to show you what is strong enough to remain.